Welcome, dear listener, tonight, as the moon glides silently across the sky and the world outside begins to quieten, let us venture into a world that is both regal and peculiar. A world where kings and queens, draped in silk and gold, found comfort in hobbies that were delightfully odd. You're not here to memorize facts, pass a test, or stay alert. You're here to drift, to ease your thoughts, one calming moment at a time. Let your eyes soften. Let your breath become slower. We'll travel gently now, through candlelit corridors, ancient castles, echoing ballrooms, and secret royal chambers. There, beyond the official portraits and grand parades, lies something far more human: boredom, curiosity, and sometimes a fascination with the absurd. You see, royalty, for all their status, were not immune to idle hours. And what they did to fill those hours? Well, let's just say their hobbies were not always as regal as their titles. From emperors who raced snails, to queens who collected clocks that never ticked, to kings who performed dental surgeries on themselves. This is a journey not of wars or treaties, but of strange little pleasures, quiet indulgences, odd routines that reveal something surprisingly endearing. So curl up, close your eyes if you wish, and let this story be a soft tide, pulling you gently into slumber. The world may have crowned them royals, but tonight we'll see them as quirky souls, not so different from us, just with bigger wardrobes. Let's begin. Medieval monarchs and curious craftsmen. Our journey begins in the late 14th century, with a man crowned in grandeur, but who feared the most delicate fate. King Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad, was gripped by a strange and fragile obsession. He believed, quite sincerely, that he was made of glass. To protect himself from shattering, Charles had iron rods sewn into his royal garments. He avoided contact with others, moved cautiously, and forbade any roughhousing near him. He even refused to sit down unless the throne was specially padded. This wasn't a metaphor or poetic melancholy. It was a very real condition, now known to modern psychology as a glass delusion, rare and deeply vivid. While others danced in the halls, Charles watched from the shadows, his mind constructing a fragile world of invisible threats. In his solitude, Charles took up careful calligraphy. Page after page, he would copy scripture and poetry, his hand trembling not with madness, but with fear of breaking. Not the usual image of a king, is it? But in those hours, Charles found quiet, and perhaps a little peace. Now let us step into the sun-drenched lands of Aquitaine, where Queen Eleanor, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, found joy not in courtly politics, but in the dirt beneath her fingernails. A true lover of gardens, Eleanor designed elaborate green spaces wherever she lived. She personally directed the planting of herbs, flowers, and even small vineyards, often organizing her courtiers into mini gardening competitions. It was said that she could identify 72 types of roses by scent alone. Some even joked that she spoke more to her plants than her counsel. Her favorite, a rare white violet she cultivated in secret, which she believed brought her vivid dreams. Under her care, royal gardens bloomed like fairy tales, and at night, after royal feasts. She would walk among the moonlit lavender, breathing in the calm of the earth. Let us now talk about Alfonso X of Castile, the astronomer king. Alfonso wasn't just a king. He was a stargazer. This 13th century Spanish monarch spent more hours with his star charts than with his generals. He commissioned one of the greatest medieval works of astronomy, the Orfonsini Tables, detailed records of planetary positions that would guide European astronomy for centuries. But his hobby wasn't just academic. Alfonso believed that by watching the stars, he could glimpse divine order, even royal fate. He built a private observatory on the castle roof, where he'd sit for hours, sometimes humming softly to himself as he charted the paths of Venus and Mars. Many of his advisors thought he was wasting time, but Alfonso would say, "Better to understand the heavens than be swallowed by the storms of men." One King Henry I of England, the eel enthusiast. You've heard of kings who hunted stags, hawked with falcons, or raced horses. But King Henry I of England, he adored eels, specifically freshwater lampreys, a slippery, snake-like creature that most would recoil from. Henry, however, considered them a delicacy and became so obsessed that he not only ate them almost daily, he also began breeding them in specially built royal eel ponds. Courtiers were sent far and wide to find the best lampreys, and monks even wrote entire records of the king's eel feasts. One chronicler noted that Henry's love for lampreys knew no bounds, and, ironically, it said he died after consuming a particularly large helping of spoiled ones. A strange end to a truly strange royal pastime. The Renaissance, a time of rebirth, of art, of science, and for a few particularly eccentric royals, a time of very curious hobbies. As candlelight flickers across marble halls, we open doors to royal chambers that hide the most unexpected indulgences. Breathe deeply, let your thoughts soften, and let's wander further to point one Emperor Rudolph II, the collector of curiosities. Imagine a castle filled with whispering machines, drawers of crystals, clockwork birds that chirp on their own. Welcome to the world of Emperor Rudolph II, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire from 1576 to 1612, and one of the strangest collectors in all of royal history. Rudolph lived in Prague Castle, but transformed it into a living museum, a Wunderkammer, or cabinet of wonders. His collection included a taxidermied mermaid made from monkey parts and fish tails, a feather from the mythical phoenix, really a dyed ostrich plume, dozens of automatons, wind-up machines that moved on their own, a room dedicated to glowing stones, and even an alchemist's lab, which he visited every morning before breakfast. Rudolph rarely held court. Instead, he spent hours alone, arranging his objects, whispering to his mechanical owls, and asking astrologers what the stars said about his collection. He believed his hobby wasn't just strange, it was divine. He thought the universe had scattered secrets and oddities, and it was his job to gather them. To point to Catherine de' Medici, perfumes and poisons in 16th century France. Queen Catherine de' Medici ruled with elegance, cunning, and a love of scent that tiptoed into darkness. Catherine believed that Perfume was more than beauty, it was power. She commissioned an elite group of perfumers who followed her everywhere, creating signature scents not just to smell sweet, but to control rooms, seduce enemies, and in whispered rumors, to kill. Yes, poison perfumes. Her perfume bottles were rumored to be double-layered, scent in one vial, venom in the other. She even had gloves infused with slow-acting toxins, gifted to rivals under the guise of luxury. But not all her hobbies were deadly. Catherine also designed elaborate perfumed fountains, which sprayed rosewater into palace gardens, and commissioned scented wallpapers for her chambers. The Queen's world smelled like lilies and lavender, with a hint of danger. To point 3, Ivan the Terrible, chess with ghosts across Europe. In the cold shadows of Moscow's stone towers, Tsar Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, played a very unusual game of chess, not with living opponents, but with portraits of people he had executed. Every evening, Ivan would set up a board alone in his chambers, move the pieces quietly, and whisper names, often playing both sides of the board. A bishop piece would represent a nobleman from Novgorod. A pawn might stand in for a former court jester. Ivan would narrate their moves, reenacting moments of betrayal, treason, or imagined offenses. To Ivan, it wasn't a game. It was history, replayed again and again, until it ended differently. His guards were forbidden from watching. But once, a servant claimed to have seen the Tsar speak to the board and nod as if it replied. Whether mad or methodical, Ivan found in chess a ritual of reflection, perhaps even regret. To point for Queen Elizabeth I, the Mirror Watcher, known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth I of England ruled with unmatched charisma. But in private, she kept a curious relationship with one object, her mirrors. At the height of her reign, Elizabeth had over 60 mirrors of varying sizes and styles, gold-framed, obsidian, Venetian glass. She would stare into them for hours, not for vanity alone, but, it is said, to study how expressions worked, how a brow raised, a smile faded, or a sigh looked when reflected. She believed that controlling the image was controlling the realm. But as she aged, something changed. One day, after falling ill, Elizabeth ordered all mirrors removed from her rooms. She refused to look into them again, ever. Yet her hobby remained, just inverted. Now, she studied other people's faces like mirrors, reading every flicker of fear or flattery. It became a game of masks, one she played until the very end. To point 5 King Eric XIV of Sweden, vegetable communication, and now, let us travel to chilly Sweden, where King Eric XIV ruled in the 16th century and developed an extremely peculiar belief. He thought vegetables, particularly peas and carrots, could communicate the thoughts of his enemies every morning. Eric would visit his garden and interrogate root vegetables. He believed their shapes and positions on the ground were secret messages, warnings, plots, even divine signs. Courtiers were baffled. Sometimes he'd stare at a deformed carrot and gasp. They were planning something in the north. Then cancel a royal tour or send troops, all based on the root's angle. He even commissioned a vegetable scribe to track how the garden changed each day. Though his reign ended in imprisonment Eric left behind pages of drawings, peas shaped like tears, turnips with ominous shadows. A king who trusted the soil more than his council. The Enlightenment brought science, reason, and revolution. But behind palace walls, where chandeliers sparkled and candlelight flickered, some royals embraced hobbies that drifted far from logic. Strange, dreamy, sometimes completely bizarre. Let's take a deep breath together. The air is thick with beeswax and incense. Now, let's step into the softer shadows of history. We begin in the misty parks of Kew Palace, where King George III of England once roamed with boots damp from dew, and a mind teetering between brilliance and breakdown. In his later years, George, already burdened by illness, found solace not in courts or councils, but in trees. He believed they spoke to him. He would walk the same paths at dawn and dusk, pausing at certain elms or yews, listening in silence. Sometimes he'd lean in and murmur back, asking questions, offering confessions, or simply thanking the tree for its time. Royal gardeners were instructed never to prune certain limbs because His Majesty believes that one branch dreams. Many mocked him, of course, but to George, the trees were old, wise, and unburdened by politics. He sat beneath it nearly every evening until his final illness took him from the public eye. So she created something entirely different, her own fantasy farm, working dairy vegetable gardens and a flock of specially brushed sheep. His favorite was a grand chestnut tree, which he named Lady Peace. In a world of glittering pressure, but for Marie, it was the only place she could breathe. At the height of Versailles opulence, Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, grew tired of endless balls and powdered wigs, and the Queen herself, in a designer peasant dress, would pretend to milk them. For guests, nestled in a quiet corner of the palace grounds, Marie built Le Hameau de la Reine, the Queen-S hamlet, a small village complete with a string chief among them, his own shadow. But this was no rustic shack. The milkmaids wore satin aprons. The cows were washed and perfumed. She even had custom porcelain milk jugs embossed with her royal seal. Because even make-believe farming had to be elegant. Critics said she mocked the poor, but others saw it as an escape, a childlike craving for simplicity. In truth, the hamlet was more theater than agriculture. He claimed he was writing poetry. With light, 3.3 Emperor Paul I of Russia, master of shadows in the icy halls of the Mikhailovsky Castle, Emperor Paul I of Russia lived with many fears. He believed that ruling was not just politics, it was performance. So, he wrote plays, dozens of them, and cast himself as the lead. Paul believed that shadows were more than absence of light. He was convinced they were omens, or even ghosts. Courtiers were handed lines upon arrival. No costume, no entry. He banned candles from certain angles in his bedroom, rearranged furniture daily to confuse the shadow watchers, and ordered mirrors removed from his private chambers after dark. One guard reported that Paul once scolded his own silhouette, shouting, "I am emperor. You are nothing but a trick." But in private, he held secret councils with puppets. But this paranoia birthed a strange hobby, shadow choreography. His favorite was a puppet he named Lord Yasmin, who always agreed with him. But even then, he'd often accidentally let someone notice his ring or accent, hoping they'd guess he was the king in costume. Each night, Paul would design elaborate candle displays in his study, creating patterns with light and shadow. Across the walls, he sketched diagrams of these nightly shadowscapes, storing them in leather-bound books labeled Whispers of the Night. His reign was short, his fears long-lasting, before cosplay became modern. Gustav III of Sweden turned his palace into a theater. Gustav was obsessed with disguises, costumes, and scripted dialogue. Court dinners were themed affairs. One night he'd be a Roman emperor, the next a Persian mystic. Even his daily meetings began with him reciting monologues, sometimes quoting himself. His favorite hobby was disappearing in disguise among commoners. Usually dressed as a merchant or sailor, he died dramatically, of course, assassinated during a masked ball, while dressed as the god Apollo. A life that blurred lines between ruler and role. Now let's visit Denmark, where Christian VII, a troubled young king, ruled more in title than in mind. Christian created an entire puppet court, wooden figures dressed in silk, fur, and lace, each representing a member of his actual government. During long nights, Christian would light candles and hold mock trials, issuing decrees to his silent, wooden audience. He wrote scripts for them, too, recording their debates in journals. No one was allowed to read. Some dismissed this as madness. Others whispered that the puppet court was more civil than the real one. Strangely enough, Christian began making better decisions in real life after his puppet sessions. Perhaps, in pretending, he found clarity. As we step into the modern era, from the 19th century onward, royalty found themselves with less power, but more time. Empires shrank, parliaments grew, but in the quiet corners of their palaces, monarchs continued to nurture peculiar passions. The velvet curtains are drawn. The world beyond is distant now. Let's wander forward, softly, through the final gallery of royal eccentricity. For point 1, Queen Victoria, mourning as a hobby in the grand, candlelit chambers of Windsor Castle. After the death of her beloved Prince Albert in 1861, Queen Victoria became consumed by a very specific and very elaborate hobby, mourning. She wore black every day for 40 years. But it wasn't just clothing. It was an entire lifestyle. Each painting was placed in different rooms. In her bedroom, she kept a life-sized statue of Albert at the foot of her bed. She commissioned artists to paint portraits of Albert posthumously, not once, but over dozens of times. From memory or based on old sketches, she had his shaving brush cleaned and placed back in its original spot daily. At Balmoral, his clothes were laid out every morning. A fresh basin of water was poured for him to shave. Servants were expected to act as if he might enter at any moment. She even collected mourning jewelry containing strands of Albert's hair, pressed into jet brooches and lockets. Her entire wardrobe became a display of melancholic elegance. It was grief turned ritual, turned obsession, turned comfort, and perhaps, in that endless repetition, she kept part of him alive, or, at least, close. For point to Kaiser Wilhelm II, the toy soldier emperor, tens of thousands of hand-painted metal figurines, cavalry, artillery, infantry, arranged with obsessive precision. Each division had a history, written out in books Wilhelm composed by hand. Sometimes he would invite guests to tour the battlefield, narrating the action like a war historian. Across the continent, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, the last emperor before the fall of the monarchy, had a lifelong obsession: toy soldiers. Even as an adult, Wilhelm had an entire ballroom converted into a miniature battlefield. Every morning before meetings, he would spend time alone, repositioning tiny armies, reenacting famous battles, or imagining new ones. Each soldier had a name. When asked once why he didn't outgrow his toys, he replied, "These men never disobey, they never challenge, and they never lose, unless I say so." His hobby may have seemed childlike, but it also revealed a desire for control. In a world spiraling toward war, King Farouk I of Egypt, who reigned during the early 20th century, is remembered as one of the world's most extravagant monarchs, and the owner of one of the most bizarre private collections ever assembled. Farouk collected over 8,500 coins, many stolen from museums around the world. A watch once owned by Marie Antoinette, a soap bar used by Napoleon, a collection of royal toothbrushes, yes, he claimed some were used by European monarchs, and most shockingly, a preserved piece of Abraham Lincoln's chair from the night of his assassination. But the strangest part? He often stole these items himself. He was obsessed with the thrill. Rumors circulated of Farouk slipping into antique shops in disguise, talking in broken French, pretending to be a foreign diplomat, and then walking out with items he hadn't paid for. One Parisian coin dealer once said, he didn't steal because he needed. He stole because he was bored. Eventually, his collection, some say worth over $1 billion today, was seized when he was overthrown. But among dusty vaults and secret safes, many believe some of his strange treasures remain hidden. Who ruled in the mid-1800s and whose greatest passion was castles? For point for King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale builder, we cannot discuss strange hobbies without honoring the Mad King himself, Ludwig II of Bavaria. Ludwig wasn't interested in politics. Instead, he became obsessed with medieval romance, myths, and the operas of Richard Wagner. Some had entire rooms dedicated to moonlight, others to artificial thunder. So, he began building. He designed Neuschwanstein Castle, now one of the most famous castles in the world, not for war, but for fantasy, modern. Inside, there were mosaics of swans, ceilings painted with stars, and bedrooms modeled after opera scenes, and corresponding with military officers and civilians who claimed to see alien craft. But it didn't stop there. He even invited alleged witnesses to private interviews at Buckingham Palace. He began building castles purely for himself, with no intention of housing government functions or guests. At one point, he proposed building a floating palace in the middle of a mountain lake, with mirrored walls that would reflect eternity. He was declared insane before all his dreams were completed. But what he left behind still feels like a waking dream. Even into the 20th century, royal hobbies didn't lose their strangeness. They simply became more. Prince Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh and husband to Queen Elizabeth II, held a deep and lasting interest in UFOs after reports of strange lights in the skies over Britain in the 1950s. Philip began collecting files, reading books on sightings. He was especially intrigued by the idea that extraterrestrials might be monitoring Earth's conflicts. He kept a private library of over 60 books on UFOs, some filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Philip once remarked, "There are many reasons to be skeptical, but the skies have stories we cannot yet explain." It was never confirmed if he saw anything himself, but when he passed, several of those books were found dog-eared beside his favorite reading chair. And so, our candle has flickered to its final glow. From medieval kings who feared they were made of glass, to queens who wore black for 40 years, to emperors who choreographed shadows, to princes who scanned the skies for lights unknown, royalty, for all their power, were deeply, beautifully human. They remind us that even those who rule nations must find something small, something gentle, to hold onto in the silence. They too grew restless, they too grew lonely, and in their quietest hours, they sought comfort in the strangest places. Some found peace in gardens, some in toy soldiers, some in whispered conversations with trees. Their hobbies, their rituals, their odd delights, they reveal something softer than crowns and scepters. Tonight, you've wandered the forgotten corners of royal history, through velvet shadows, starlit halls, and rooms filled with curious collections. Now, let those stories fade, like pages turning in your mind. Let sleep begin to rise like mist through castle windows, and may your dreams be filled with soft laughter, flickering lanterns, and perhaps the gentle hum of a mechanical owl, or the scent of lilies in a queen's midnight garden. Good night, traveler, and thank you for wandering through the wonders of history with me.